If someone told you that the world was about to enter into a collision with no return, you might laugh. But if I showed you that as you watch this video, the largest aircraft carriers on the planet are positioning themselves in the Middle East, would you stop and listen? If I were Iran, the Houthis, or any hate-funded group, I would be scared right now. This is not an isolated opinion. It is the reflection of a real, military, spiritual, and prophetic movement. A collision between armed powers and a region that has been beating like humanity's clock for centuries. What happens there echoes here, and whoever ignores it will not be prepared. At this very moment, the United States put two of its giants into motion. The aircraft carriers Harry S. Truman and Carl Vinson were sent to the waters of the Middle East. But it's not just the size of these machines that is impressive. What they carry is the clear symbol that the world is preparing for something much bigger than any headline is saying. It is a silent but lethal response to Houthi attacks and blockades of trade routes. But behind the weapons and strategy, there is something deeper at play. A war for control not only of territory, but of truth. Do you see how this isn't just happening out there? The same trade routes that are being threatened are those that support the global economy. And the soldiers now aboard these ships are not just pieces on a war board. They are the harbinger of a collapse that could explode like a wildfire. Many ignore the spiritual context of this war. But when Israel enters into confrontation and Iran appears as a sponsor of terrorist groups, the prophetic board shifts. And there is a detail that few noticed. The U.S. positioned its B-2A Spirit stealth bombers at the Diego Garcia military base. These planes are not just symbols of power. They are proof that something is about to happen. How far to Tehran? About 5,000 kilometers. The reach of B-2A? Almost 7,000. They can come and go. And the most frightening thing, these planes have nuclear capabilities. This information was not given with fanfare. It was mentioned subtly, almost as a warning to those who know what to look for. For anyone who reads the Bible, these movements are no surprise. The scriptures speak of a time when the nations would unite against Israel and conflicts would intensify in the east. Wars, rumors of wars, nations against nations. And while some call it a coincidence, those watching understand there is a clock ticking. And time doesn't stop for those who don't believe. It's not just a war for oil or power. It is a battle that begins in heaven, manifests itself on earth, and ends in the human heart. The question now is not will it happen? The question is, do you see what is in front of your eyes? Because ignoring the signs is the biggest mistake of this generation. If the prophecy is coming true, then we are not just seeing tanks and missiles. We are seeing the word moving. And that changes everything. While the eyes of the world are focused on air and naval movements, there is another war going on beneath the earth, literally. Gaza, one of the most tense regions on the planet, holds a secret that many prefer to ignore. Underneath the city there is another city, a maze of tunnels dug with millions of dollars that were supposed to feed families and care for children, but were used to dig hate. That's where Hamas hides. It is from there that rockets shoot towards civilians. It is in this underground that the war becomes even dirtier and silent. Israel began a full ground operation. And contrary to what many say, there is a logic to this. Before attacking, a warning was given for civilians to leave the area. But Hamas leaders use the population as a shield. They shoot from schools, hospitals, and common homes. When the counterattack arrives, the same people who launched the rockets hide in the tunnels. It is a cowardly war, based on emotional manipulation and propaganda. Meanwhile, soldiers risk their lives to close each tunnel entrance, sealing the destruction of a system that was meant to keep the chaos alive. Dividing Gaza into 5 areas helps to understand the scenario. Rafah, Khan Yunis, Central Gaza, Gaza City, and the North. In these areas, there were hundreds of thousands of people before the conflict. Now, these same areas are the scene of bombings, drones, and clashes. But it's not just what's on the ground that matters. What scares the most is what's underneath. A clandestine military structure that drains resources and deceives the entire world. Around 60% of the tunnels have already been destroyed, according to the Times of Israel. But the Jerusalem Post says there is still a long way to go. The war, therefore, is still in the dark. Recent images show something unprecedented. Civilians in Gaza shouting in the streets that Hamas are terrorists. It's a shock. But is it real? Or is it an act? The answer is not simple. It could be genuine revolt, but it could also be a desperate ploy by Hamas itself, trying to flip the narrative and push Israel against the wall. Whatever the reason, the landscape is changing. The mask of those who use faith to destroy is falling, and even those who used to applaud now feel ashamed. In the midst of this confusion, one certainty emerges. The truth always comes to light, even if it's buried under tons of concrete or hidden behind a rehearsed speech. The war in Gaza is not just between two sides. It is between light and darkness, between deception and revelation. And as the tunnels are sealed, the truth finds its way upward. The question that remains is not who is right, but what are you seeing? Because the manipulation is not just there, it's here too. And if you only see what you are shown, you are being led like cattle into the abyss. Open your eyes, pray for discernment. Because those who walk in truth see even in the dark. Few noticed the most disturbing detail of this entire crisis. Europe is silent. As global trade is threatened and the U.S. puts its soldiers in the path of missiles, the European continent appears paralyzed. But it's not for lack of interest. It's out of cowardice. The Red Sea route, which passes through the Suez Canal, is fundamental for Europe. If it is blocked, it is the European economy that will collapse first. And yet, who is protecting this route? The Americans. Again, this protection is not symbolic. It has a cost. Soldiers, aircraft carriers, bombers, surveillance. All this to ensure that oil and products circulate. The ironic thing is that the U.S. doesn't really need this route. They have other ways, but they are there. And for that, the American administration is furious, because they are defending a problem that is not directly theirs. And the Europeans, who should be leading, are looking at the ground. This indignation does not appear in the newspapers, but she's real behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the Houthis continue to be bombed. Operations are intense, coordinated, and precise. The U.S. is not just protecting ships, they are eliminating targets with surgical precision. And the message is being given: whoever threatens the international order will be silenced, with or without global consensus. But this is not just military strategy. It is compliance with principles. It is a response that, for those with spiritual eyes, shows that something is being broken in the spiritual world. Sovereignty is being put to the test. In the biblical scenario, nations that remain silent in the face of injustice will also be held accountable. The Word talks about kings who do not take a stand, about fragile alliances, and about the judgment that will come upon those who hide in neutrality. European silence is not diplomacy, it's abandonment. And the American fury, although strategic, also reveals a prophetic charge. There is something being demanded behind the scenes of the story, and the nations that pretend not to see will see when it is too late. This war is not just about tanks. It's principled, of values, truth against relativism, of action versus omission, and every bomb that explodes in the East is reverberating here, in the faith of the churches, in political speeches, in the rocking economy, and mainly in the consciousness of those who realize that it is no longer possible to pretend that everything is fine. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Because this war didn't start in 2023. It started before the foundation of the world. And now, the time has come to decide which side you will be on. A seemingly small detail went unnoticed by many, but for those with spiritual eyes, it is a glaring sign. Donald Trump declared full support for Israel, and with that what seemed to be just another war in the Middle East gained a new layer. We are no longer just talking about diplomacy or armies. We are talking about prophetic fulfillment, the repositioning of authorities and invisible alignments between heaven and earth. Trump is not a political messiah, nor is he a saint, but there is something about him that evokes reactions that no other president has generated. When he supports Israel, crowds become angry. Governments divide. The media squirms. This is not natural. It's spiritual. And every Christian who knows the Word must understand that what drives this war of narratives against him is not just ideology. It is war against a prophetic position that bothers hell. Unrestricted support for Israel's sovereignty casts Trump as a prophetic, if imperfect, figure. And when he says Israel will win and the United States will guarantee it, the words echo like decrees in the invisible world. This declaration did more than activate armies. She revealed intentions, and it also separated those who are for Israel from those who just say they are, because support for Israel today is a test of spiritual alignment. Of course, not everything Trump does is right. It is clear that he is a flawed man, full of mistakes. But the Word is full of examples of kings who, although far from being saints, were God's instruments to fulfill promises. Cyrus, for example, was not a Jew, but he freed the Jews. And David, even though he sinned, was called a man after God's own heart. What matters is, what comes out of this man's mouth creates a tremor in the heavens, and the answer, today, is yes. When leaders stand up to defend what God stands for, there are consequences, and when leaders are silent, there is even more. Trump's position reveals more than politics, reveals battle. And every Christian who prays for discernment must evaluate the fruits, not the appearances. Because there's something happening up high, and we can't ignore it. The sky breathes when someone positions themselves clearly. And all hell shakes when this position echoes in the midst of the confusion. Trump may not be the hero many want, but in this scenario, he is an instrument. And every instrument used by God bothers those who love chaos. That should be enough to open the eyes of many. Iran has been the financier, protector, and inspirer of these groups. Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, all with the same doctrine, destroy Israel and challenge the West. But at the same time as they spread chaos, they maintain a diplomatic appearance before the world. They talk about peace while training children to die. They talk about human rights while financing torture. And many swallow this theater as if it were true. The lie became a strategy, and whoever tells the truth is called intolerant. But that facade is crumbling. The strategic bombings, the internal protests, the divisions between Arabs and their governments show that something is about to implode. The masks are falling off. And the truth, even though it is persecuted, is becoming impossible to hide. Because when even the people of Gaza shout, Hamas are terrorists, something much deeper is happening. It's a spiritual crack. And where there is a crack, there is light coming in. Iran knows this. And that's why he's scared. You know that what's coming is not just war, it's exposure, it's shame, it's judgment. And it is precisely at this point that the script becomes prophetic, because the Word says that everything that is hidden will be revealed, that those who conspire in the shadows will be brought down in the light of day, and that every tongue that rises against the chosen will be silenced. We are not just witnessing a geopolitical conflict. We are witnessing the fulfillment of words that were spoken thousands of years ago. And if this is true, and it is, then the next step is not just military, it's spiritual. It is time to prepare your heart, because when the nations move, heaven also speaks, and those who don't listen will be crushed by what they don't understand. War is not the end. It's just the beginning of something that was prophesied. And if the eyes of the world are now focused on Israel and Iran, the eyes of God remain on those who believe in the truth. Are you ready to see what comes next? As missiles are launched and iron shields intercept the chaos, there is another war going on. And it is quieter, deeper, and more dangerous. It's not a war of tanks, it's a war of minds, of narratives. Who defines good and evil? This is why the battlefield is now not just on Gaza soil, nor on American ships. It's on cell phone screens, in manipulated headlines, on social media, taken over by misinformation. And the most frightening thing, many Christians are being swallowed by this deception. Hamas uses images of destruction to accuse Israel, while hiding that the rockets were launched from hospitals and daycare centers. Iran pays journalists and influencers to say it is defending the Palestinian people, but trains terrorists in silence. And meanwhile, the majority of the world remains silent, or worse, applauds the attackers. The spirit of confusion set in. The darkness is no longer trying to hide, it now presents itself as light. And those who do not have discernment will defend what God abhors. Jesus warned about this, that in the last times even the chosen could be deceived, and that's exactly what's happening. Christians defending the oppressor, churches silenced for fear of appearing political, pastors confusing peace with passivity. But there are times when neutrality is a sin. When the truth is being murdered before our eyes, silence is betrayal. And whoever serves the kingdom needs to speak up, even if it costs money. The spiritual battlefield became visible. It's on television, in universities, in video comments, in bar conversations. The Antichrist has not yet revealed himself, but his spirit is already acting, and he is doing it skillfully, redefining right and wrong, replacing eternal principles with selective human rights, turning God's people against themselves through doubt, shame, and emotional manipulation. But there is resistance, small but alive, men and women who do not bend the knee to ideologies, who do not silence their faith for fear of retaliation. They see what's behind the headlines. They understand that when a missile is launched against Israel, the spiritual world is shaken. They know that the visible conflict is just the tip of an invisible but lethal iceberg. And that's why they're still standing. The war of the brains will define which side you are on, not because of what you feel, but because of what you understand. And to understand, you need to have light, because those who walk in the darkness of the media, slogans and hashtags, will never realize that they are fighting for the wrong side. Pray for wisdom, because in the end, it won't be emotion that saves you, it's the truth. A seemingly small detail went unnoticed by many, but for those with spiritual eyes, it is a glaring sign. Donald Trump declared full support for Israel. And with that, what seemed to be just another war in the Middle East gained a new layer. We are no longer just talking about diplomacy or armies. We are talking about prophetic fulfillment, the repositioning of authorities and invisible alignments between heaven and earth. Trump is not a political messiah, nor is he a saint. But there is something about him that evokes reactions that no other president has generated. When he supports Israel, crowds become angry. Governments divide. The media squirms. This is not natural. It's spiritual. And every Christian who knows the Word must understand that what drives this war of narratives against him is not just ideology. It is war against a prophetic position that bothers hell. Unrestricted support for Israel's sovereignty casts Trump as a prophetic, if imperfect, figure. And when he says Israel will win and the United States will guarantee it, the words echo like decrees in the invisible world. This declaration did more than activate armies. She revealed intentions, and it also separated those who are for Israel from those who just say they are. Because support for Israel today is a test of spiritual alignment. Of course, not everything Trump does is right. It is clear that he is a flawed man, full of mistakes. But the Word is full of examples of kings who, although far from being saints, were God's instruments to fulfill promises. Cyrus, for example, was not a Jew, but he freed the Jews. And David, even though he sinned, was called a man after God's own heart. What matters is, what comes out of this man's mouth creates a tremor in the heavens. And the answer, today, is yes. When leaders stand up to defend what God stands for, there are consequences. And when leaders are silent, there is even more. Trump's position reveals more than politics, reveals battle. And every Christian who prays for discernment must evaluate the fruits, not the appearances. Because there's something happening up high, and we can't ignore it. The sky breathes when someone positions themselves clearly, and all hell shakes when this position echoes in the midst of the confusion. Trump may not be the hero many want, but in this scenario he is an instrument, and every instrument used by God bothers those who love chaos. That should be enough to open the eyes of many.